I pulled into the driveway. The tires of my car crunching against the gravel. It was a crisp morning. The kind that felt promising. Like the start of something new. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late. Not a big deal, right? But then I saw her. My sister, Clara, walking out of the house. Dragging her suitcase behind her like she was ready for a vacation. My smile faltered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Clara? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But it came out more like a question I didn't really want the answer to. Clara smiled at me, but it wasn't a smile I could understand. There was something too satisfied about it. Too smug. I'm going with Mom and Dad, she said, the words coming out with a strange mix of excitement and indifference. She didn't even look at me for long. Just zipped up her suitcase and tossed her hair over her shoulder. I froze. What? I asked, my chest tightening as I tried to make sense of what was happening. What do you mean? You're going? Mom appeared at the front door just then. Her suitcase in hand, her smile as wide as ever. Like she hadn't just shattered my world. She waved at me, cheerful, almost too cheerful. Oh, Zara, she said, as if what she was about to say was completely normal. We decided Clara should go instead of you. I blinked, trying to process the words that had just left her mouth. My mind raced. Instead of me? I repeated, my voice tightening. Yes, she said, her tone light, almost dismissive, as if this was a decision made without much thought. Clara's been under a lot of stress lately. And we think she really needs this trip. You've been working so hard lately. You can always go later. Sweetheart, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The trip I'd planned. The trip I'd saved up for. The trip I'd dreamed about for months. It wasn't mine anymore. It was Clara's. I had been pushed aside without even being asked. But I paid for everything. I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Oh, we know, sweetheart, she said, brushing it off. And we appreciate it. But Clara needs this right now. You're always so busy. This is the right time for her. I looked over at Clara. Her smug expression still there. As if she had somehow earned this. She didn't even feel guilty. Didn't even offer a word of apology. Instead, she just shrugged and looked at me with that fake smile. Thanks for understanding, sis, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It made my blood boil. I stood there, frozen, as my heart pounded in my chest. My dad appeared behind Mom, his eyes avoiding mine as he handed me his suitcase. It felt like I was on the outside looking in, a silent observer to the family I had worked so hard to be a part of. Only to realize they had no problem excluding me from it. This is unbelievable, I whispered, my voice shaking. This was supposed to be our trip. Something for us to share. Well, it still is, Mom said, her smile not wavering. Just with Clara instead. I wanted to scream, wanted to tell her how wrong this was. But I could feel the lump in my throat. The pressure building behind my eyes. I couldn't even speak. What was the point? I wasn't going to change anything. I wasn't going to get the trip I had earned. Not now. Not ever. Don't make this a big deal. Zara, Mom said, her voice now cold, like she was trying to silence any objections. Clara needs a break. She's had a tough time. You'll have your time. Just not now. I nodded stiffly, my thoughts racing, my heart heavy. What could I say? What was the point of arguing when the decision had already been made? Clara slid into the back seat of my car without a second glance. And I shut the door with a quiet thud. My mind reeling. It was clear now. It didn't matter how much I tried. How much I sacrificed. In their eyes, Clara would always come first. Always. I forced a smile, but it felt like it would shatter at any moment. As I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, I glanced over at Clara in the rearview mirror. Her face was lit up with excitement. As if she were the one who had been planning this trip for years. If they wanted to take Clara instead of me, fine, let them. But there was one thing they wouldn't get. They wouldn't enjoy this trip on my terms. Not when it was all my hard work that had gone into it. I couldn't stop them from going. But I could make sure they didn't enjoy a single moment of it. The car hummed quietly as I drove, the only sound filling the air being the occasional murmur from Clara. who hadn't seemed to notice the tension radiating from me. She chattered away, her voice high with excitement, oblivious to the weight pressing down on my chest. I kept my hands firmly on the wheel, my knuckles white as I gripped it tightly, staring straight ahead. "Do you think we'll have time to go shopping in Paris?" Clara asked, leaning forward from the back seat. "I saw this TikTok about these amazing stores, and I'm dying to check them out. I'm so glad Mom and Dad decided to bring me. This is going to be amazing." Her words bounced off the walls of the car, and I clenched my jaw to stop myself from snapping. I forced a smile, not even sure if she could see it in the rearview mirror. "Sounds fun, Clara," I replied, my voice flat, a stark contrast to the enthusiasm she was spilling out. Mom's voice drifted from the front seat, her tone warm and reassuring. "Of course, we'll have time for that. Honey, we'll make sure to fit it all in. We'll just figure it out when we get there." "Yeah, figure it out," I repeated under my breath, the bitterness in my words hanging in the air. When we get there, it wasn't we anymore, it was them. The trip I had spent months organizing and paying for was no longer mine to enjoy. I was merely the driver, the person who would drop them off and go home. Alone. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. There was no point. What good would it do to say anything? What difference did it make? My mom had made up her mind, and Clara was completely indifferent to the fact that this trip wasn't hers to take. At one point, Dad cleared his throat from the front seat. "Thanks for driving us, Zara," he said, his voice awkward, like he wasn't sure what to say. "I know this probably feels unusual." Unusual? That was an interesting way to put it. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but all I could muster was a stiff nod. The silence that filled the car was deafening. Even Clara's usual chatter couldn't break through the thick tension that seemed to have wrapped itself around us. Then, as if on cue, Clara leaned forward again, her voice grating in the quiet. "You're not mad, right?" She almost sounded like she was testing the waters, her words wrapped in a thin layer of feigned innocence. "I mean, this is really big of you. Letting me go instead. I could never have afforded this on my own." I felt my jaw tighten, and for a second, I thought I might scream. But I didn't. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. So instead, I forced a tight, controlled smile. "Of course, Clara," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Enjoy the trip." We fell back into silence after that. The car seemed to get quieter the closer we got to the airport. I couldn't look at them anymore. I didn't want to see the excitement on Clara's face, the way she glanced at Mom, her eyes bright with anticipation for a trip that was meant to be mine. I wanted to scream at them, ask them why they'd done this, why they'd thrown my hard work and sacrifices away. But the words were trapped inside, and nothing could escape. As we neared the drop-off zone, my heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. This was it, the moment I was no longer part of the story. I wasn't sure what to expect after this, but I knew I wasn't going to be the one waiting for the souvenirs or the photos. They would be enjoying their trip without me, and as much as it hurt, there was nothing I could do about it. Before I share what happened next, the moment when everything came crashing down, I want to connect with you. My amazing viewers, where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believed in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. The car came to a stop in front of the airport terminal, the engine purring softly before it went silent. I sat there for a moment, my fingers still gripping the steering wheel, unwilling to let go. Clara was already unbuckling her seatbelt, ready to jump out and join the excitement that awaited her, not sparing me a second thought. Mom and Dad started to gather their things, but I stayed seated, staring straight ahead, my mind racing. As they all began to exit the car, I felt this overwhelming weight on my chest, like everything I had worked for was slipping away, piece by piece. I could hear their voices fading as they moved toward the terminal. The quiet settled in, a silence I hadn't expected but desperately needed. Alone, completely alone. The anger inside me had been simmering for hours, but now it boiled over. I wasn't going to sit back and let them enjoy this trip. My trip, without any consequences. They thought I would just accept it, except being pushed aside like I didn't matter. But I wasn't the same person I had been yesterday. I wasn't the one who kept quiet, who smiled through the hurt. Not anymore. I sat there for another minute, letting the anger wash over me like a wave, until it felt like the only option left was to act. I could already hear their voices in my head. Their excuses. Their reasons for taking Clara instead of me. I could already feel the sting of their indifference. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. I turned off the engine and grabbed my phone. The thought of canceling everything, of taking away what they had so carelessly stolen from me, filled me with an odd sense of satisfaction. The power was in my hands now. I pulled up the app where I'd booked the hotels, the tours, the flights, and I began to tap away. Each click a reminder of how much I had invested, how much I had sacrificed. One by one, the reservations disappeared, cancelled, refunded. It was like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. They wanted to take Clara instead of me? Fine, but they wouldn't get to enjoy the luxury, the comfort, the experiences I had planned. All at my expense. Not anymore. I could already imagine the look on their faces when they arrived in Paris and realized they had nowhere to stay. No fancy dinners or guided tours waiting for them. Nothing. I couldn't stop the small smile that crept across my face as I hit the final, cancel, button. For years, I had been the one to clean up their messes, to smooth over the awkward moments, to make everything work, no matter the cost to myself. But that was over now. I wasn't their fixer anymore. I wasn't going to make excuses for their behavior or let them walk all over me. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about finally taking control of my own life. I leaned back in the chair and let the silence of the house wash over me. I had done it. I had taken the first step in freeing myself from the expectations, from the constant pressure to be the one who always put others first. The freedom felt strange but liberating. They could deal with the fallout when they got back. I wasn't going to apologize for taking my power back. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally doing something for myself. And that was more than enough. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, interrupting the quiet that had settled around me. I glanced at the screen. But I already knew who it was. It was Mom. Of course it was. I had expected this call. But I wasn't prepared for the flood of emotions that came with it. I stared at the phone for a moment, letting it vibrate against the surface. Should I answer? Should I let them have a piece of my mind? I couldn't decide. But the phone buzzed again. More persistent this time. Finally, I picked it up, my fingers shaking just slightly as I swiped to answer. Zara, what did you do? Mom's voice came through the phone, sharp and full of disbelief. The hotel won't let us check in. They said the reservation was cancelled. What is going on? I leaned back against the counter, crossing my arms. I hadn't expected her to be this angry. Maybe I should have, but hearing the panic in her voice felt oddly satisfying. I cancelled everything, Mom, I said calmly, my voice colder than I thought it would be. I figured if you wanted to take Clara instead of me, you could figure out the rest of the trip on your own. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a frustrated sigh. Zara, this isn't funny. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. The tours, there's nothing left. Maybe you should have thought about that before you made your decision. I replied, my voice firm now. I gave you everything. I worked so hard for this trip. And you just took it from me. So yeah, I took it back. Mom didn't respond right away. And for a moment, I thought she might actually understand. But the silence didn't last long. It was quickly filled with Clara's voice, loud and demanding, cutting through the tension. Zara, this is so petty. Clara snapped. You're ruining everything. You need to fix it. Now, call the hotel and make it right. You can't just cancel everything because you're upset. I gritted my teeth, trying not to let the anger bubble up. I didn't ruin anything. Clara, I said, my voice tight. You can't just waltz in and take over what wasn't even yours to take. You didn't even care how much work I put into this. Did you? Stop being dramatic. She shot back. You're acting like a child. This is such a big deal to you. And for what? Just fix it already. I felt the anger surge again. But I didn't let it control me. Instead, I hung up the phone. I didn't need to hear any more of their excuses or accusations. I had made my point, and they were going to have to deal with the consequences. But the phone didn't stay quiet for long. It rang again, and this time, it was Dad. I took a deep breath before answering, bracing myself for whatever lecture was about to come my way. Zara, Dad said, his voice quieter than I expected. I don't understand what's going on here. Why would you do something like this? We've all been waiting for this trip. And now you don't get to enjoy it. I cut him off. You took something that I planned, something I paid for, and gave it to Clara like I didn't matter. Like none of my effort was worth anything. Why do you think I just sit here and watch you take it from me? You think this is a joke? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Dad shifting in his seat, probably realizing he wasn't going to get the apology he was expecting from me. Zara, we didn't mean for you to feel this way, he said, his voice filled with something between frustration and regret. We just thought Clara really needed this right now. You've been so focused on work. I have been working for years to make this happen. Dad, I snapped, my voice rising. But you don't care about that. Do you? You never have. It's always been about Clara. Always. There was another long silence. And when Dad spoke again, his words were more measured. You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Zara, is that really fair? I laughed. But it wasn't a happy sound. Fair? I repeated. Is it fair that you always choose Clara over me? That I've spent years cleaning up your messes while she gets everything handed to her? What's fair about that? Dad didn't respond right away. I could hear him sighing on the other end of the line, probably realizing that I wasn't going to back down this time. But before he could say anything else, I cut him off. I'm done. I'm not fixing this. You want to be a family? Start treating me like I'm part of it. Until then, I'm done. I hung up before he could say another word, the finality of it ringing in my ears. The phone was silent again, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that came with avoiding conflict. It was the kind that came with finally standing up for myself. Finally saying no. They could blame me all they wanted, but I wasn't the one who had messed everything up. They were, and this time, I wasn't going to fix it for them. The next few days passed in a blur. My phone remained mostly silent, save for a few scattered texts from my parents, all asking the same thing. When will you fix this? But I didn't respond. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a gift. I spent the next few days just being. No calls to answer, no one to appease. I didn't feel the constant pressure to be the person they could lean on, the one who always sacrificed for everyone else. I didn't have to smile through the hurt anymore. Didn't have to swallow my feelings just to make everyone else feel better. It was a strange freedom, and I had no idea how much I needed it until it was finally here. No plans, no obligations, just a rare moment of peace that I'd never known before. The days felt longer, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me realize just how much time I had lost. Time I had spent trying to make them happy, trying to keep everyone else's world running while mine stood still. One morning, I woke up early, the sunlight streaming through the blinds. I stretched, letting the warmth of the sun wash over me, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel exhausted. I didn't feel drained. I felt awake. I felt alive. I grabbed my phone, deciding to check in on the messages that had been left. But I didn't feel the urgency I had before. They were still there, still asking for things, still blaming me. But this time, the words didn't hurt. They didn't have the same power over me. As I scrolled through the messages, one stood out. It was from Grace. It was simple but packed with meaning. You finally did it. Zara, you finally put yourself first. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Grace had always been there, in the background, cheering me on when I couldn't cheer for myself. She had been the one to tell me it was okay to say no, to stop trying to fix everything for everyone. And now, for the first time, I felt like I had actually done it. I had taken control of my life. I had made a choice. And it wasn't about anyone else. It was about me. I sent Grace a quick message back. Thank you for being there. Always. I'm doing it. I'm actually doing it. Later that afternoon, I found myself walking through the park. Something I hadn't done in years. I wasn't rushing to get somewhere. Wasn't thinking about all the things I should be doing. I was just walking. And it felt like the most freeing thing in the world. The world seemed brighter. Somehow, the sun shone a little warmer. The air was a little fresher. I wasn't weighed down by the constant expectations anymore. I had finally let go of the need to please them. To be their fixer. To be the person who always took a backseat to everyone else's needs. For the first time, I was walking for me. The next day, I did something completely unexpected. I signed up for a photography class. It was something I had always wanted to do. But I'd never made time for it. I'd always been too busy. Too caught up in everything else to even think about it. But now I had the space. The time. The freedom to finally do something for myself. And it felt incredible. As the days passed, I began to feel more like myself again. The person I had put on hold for so long. I started taking long walks in the morning. Exploring parts of the city I had never bothered to see before. I spent weekends getting lost in books. In art. In new hobbies. I felt like a person again. Not someone's daughter. Not someone's sister. Not someone's caretaker. Just me. I could feel the change in me. The weight that had been holding me down for so long was finally gone. I wasn't worried about how my family would react anymore. Because their approval didn't define me. I was free. One afternoon, I sat down with a cup of coffee. Letting the warmth settle into my bones. I looked out the window. Watching the world go by. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was no longer living for anyone else. I was living for me. And that, in itself, was the most empowering thing I had ever done. The days that followed felt like the start of something new. Each morning, I woke up without the usual knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Without the looming thought of obligations I wasn't ready to fulfill. For the first time, I could breathe. I could think clearly. Without the noise of others constantly demanding my time and energy. I had taken the first step. I had removed myself from the mess. And now, I had the space to make a decision. It was a Saturday morning when it hit me. This newfound freedom wasn't just a break. It was a chance. A chance to do something for myself. Something I had wanted for years but had put on the back burner every time someone else needed me. The idea came quietly, almost like a whisper, but once it took root, it grew in my mind with surprising force. I had been waiting to go on this trip with my family. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, why wait for them? Why keep pushing my dreams aside just to make room for everyone else's? I didn't need to justify it to anyone. I didn't need their permission. I could go alone. I could take the trip I had dreamed of, for me. And not for anyone else. Italy had always been at the top of my list. And the thought of wandering through the narrow streets of Rome, sipping coffee at small cafes in Florence, or watching the sunset over the canals of Venice, it made my heart race with excitement. I sat down with my laptop and pulled up a search engine. The bookings I had cancelled for my parents' trip seemed like a lifetime ago. And now, the idea of planning my own adventure, with no one else to consider, felt almost liberating. I could pick the dates, the places, the pace, no more worrying about what they wanted or trying to please anyone. Just me and the road ahead. I quickly found myself lost in the possibilities, reading about the best spots to visit, the hidden gems, the places off the beaten path. The excitement was building, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel guilty about it. I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The next morning, I booked my flights. I picked my dates. I started planning. And with each new booking, the excitement grew, stronger and more real. This wasn't just about a trip anymore, it was about taking my life back. It was about embracing the independence I had been missing for so long. The world was vast, and I was finally ready to explore it, on my own terms. As the days passed and the trip neared, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and anticipation. It wasn't the same feeling of stress or pressure I had once carried when planning for others. This time, it was different. It was mine. I wasn't going to be the person who followed someone else's rules. I was going to be the one who made the decisions. The one who called the shots. And when I landed in Rome, I knew it would be more than just a trip. It would be the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I wasn't defined by what others expected of me, but by the choices I made for myself. The decision was made. I was stepping into a life where I came first. And I was no longer afraid to embrace it. The road ahead was mine to carve. And I wasn't looking back. When I returned from Italy, the trip that had been a declaration of independence, the world around me felt different. The usual weight of guilt, the pressure to please, no longer hung over me. I had taken control of my life. And though I hadn't known it at the time, it had set in motion a shift that wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Mental. I was changed. I had expected to feel a rush of regret when I came back. Maybe a sense of longing for the family I had left behind. But instead, I felt something else. Peace. A quiet, content peace that came with knowing I had made the right choice. I wasn't apologizing for putting myself first anymore. I wasn't asking for approval. I had finally stopped seeking validation from people who had never truly seen me. But reality, as it often does, crept in, and the messages started coming. First, it was from Mom, one text. Then another, each one more urgent, more strained. Zara, we need to talk. Please, can you call me? Then Clara, the familiar entitled tone still there. Still demanding. You're so dramatic. Zara, this is ridiculous. Just fix everything. You're making things worse. And then, Dad, quieter than the others, but still asking for the same thing. We need to talk. The guilt crept in at first. It always did, didn't it? The nagging thought that maybe I had taken things too far. Maybe I should fix it. Smooth it over. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. But then I remembered. I remembered the mornings spent feeling suffocated. The nights where I couldn't breathe because I was always trying to hold everything together for everyone else. I remembered how, for years, I had put myself last. I was done with that. I wasn't their fixer anymore. And I wasn't going to step back into that role just to make them feel better about their mistakes. I had set boundaries, and now it was time to protect them. I didn't answer the calls. Not immediately. I gave myself a space to sit with my thoughts. To reflect on how far I'd come. I realized that what had started as a simple decision to take control of my trip had turned into a much larger choice. The decision to reclaim my life. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into being someone I wasn't anymore. By the time I finally sat down to read their messages, I was clear-headed. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't going to give in. I could feel their disappointment through the screen. Their frustration, and their disbelief that I hadn't fallen back into line. But I was done trying to fix things for them. Their messages were full of guilt trips. Full of, we're family, and, this isn't how we treat each other. But I didn't feel the familiar tug of obligation anymore. It wasn't about how they saw it. It was about how I saw it. I had spent so many years swallowing my feelings. Pretending that their actions didn't hurt. That their expectations didn't suffocate me. Now, for the first time, I saw things clearly. I wasn't responsible for fixing their messes. I wasn't the one who had created this situation. And I wasn't going to apologize for taking back my power. I didn't respond to their texts immediately. Instead, I sat in my living room, looking at the sunlight streaming through the windows. It felt like a symbol of everything I had reclaimed. My life, my choices, my space. And when I finally did call them back, I wasn't the same person who had left. My voice was calm. Steady, no longer filled with the frustration of trying to be everything for everyone. I'm not going to fix this. I said, you wanted to take Clara instead of me? Fine, but you don't get to enjoy the trip I planned without me. I've made my choice, and I'm not going to apologize for it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And when they spoke again, their words were different, softer, more measured, but it didn't matter. The words didn't change the fact that I had done what was right for me. And that, finally, was enough. The next few weeks were a blur of adjusting to this new version of myself. I didn't answer to anyone's expectations anymore. And for the first time, I began to live on my terms. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the guilt tried to creep back in. When the old patterns of behavior tried to pull me back into the role I had played for so long. But I fought it. I was learning, slowly but surely, that my happiness didn't rely on anyone else. I had to be okay with saying no. I had to be okay with disappointing others if it meant I could be true to myself. And as I stood at the window one evening, watching the sunset, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about so much more. It was about the years I had spent living for everyone but myself. And how, finally, I had made the choice to stop. It was about reclaiming my voice, my time, and my life. It wasn't easy, but it was mine, and that was everything. As the weeks passed, I found myself slipping into a new rhythm. One that was completely unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. I wasn't constantly on edge, waiting for the next call, the next obligation to take precedence over my own well-being. For the first time, my days were my own. And the more I embraced that freedom, the more I realized how much of myself I had been holding back all these years. I started saying yes to things I had always put off, things that made me feel alive. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had always been curious about but never had time for. I spent weekends exploring the city, walking through neighborhoods I'd never noticed before, simply enjoying the quiet of my own company. There was something beautiful in the solitude, something empowering about finally being able to do whatever I wanted without having to explain myself to anyone. I also began to reconnect with the things I had once loved. Books that had gathered dust on my shelf now had my full attention. Old hobbies I had let go of came rushing back. I spent nights journaling, pouring my thoughts and dreams onto paper, no longer filtered by the opinions or expectations of others. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my life for me, not for my family. Not for anyone else, just me. And as I sat in my cozy apartment one afternoon, looking at the sketchbook I had started to fill, I realized something. I was building a life. A real, tangible life that didn't revolve around trying to meet other people's standards. I had broken free from the chains that had kept me tethered for so long. And now, I could finally live in a way that felt authentic, in a way that made me feel proud of who I was becoming. The phone still rang occasionally, still buzzing with messages from my parents. There were apologies mixed with frustration, each one trying to find a way to make things right, each one still holding onto the idea that I should just forgive and forget. But I had changed. And though I could feel the guilt gnawing at me sometimes, I knew now that I wasn't the one who needed to apologize. I wasn't the one who had made the mistakes. I had set a boundary. I had chosen myself, and that was a decision I could be proud of. In the midst of it all, there was a small, quiet voice inside me that reminded me of something important. I wasn't done yet. There was still so much I wanted to do, so much I wanted to experience. And for the first time, the future seemed wide open, full of possibilities instead of constraints. I booked my next trip, a solo adventure to a place I had dreamed of for years. A place where I could continue to explore not only the world but myself. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could live life on my own terms. That I was worthy of everything I had been holding back for so long. As I packed my bags and made plans, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. It wasn't the fleeting excitement of pleasing others, of fulfilling someone else's expectations. It was the deep, fulfilling excitement of doing something purely for me. And as I boarded the plane to my next destination, I realized that this was only the beginning of a life where I was the one in control. A life where my voice, my dreams, and my needs came first. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to take that leap into the unknown. The future was mine to create, and I was finally ready to embrace it. As Zara's journey comes to an end, she's not only found freedom within herself but also stepped into a new chapter of her life. If you found inspiration in Zara's story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss out on future stories. Share your thoughts about this journey in the comments below and let us know what you think of Zara's transformation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.